United States Senator for Arkansas, member of the Senate Committee on Armed Services, joins us. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Bill. Good to be on with you.
Great to have you. Let's jump right into it. Is Edward Snowden responsible for some of what's we have seen the last few days or weeks?
Unfortunately, Edward Snowden's leaks have driven a lot of terrorist communication into encrypted devices and otherwise revealed very effective surveillance techniques that our intelligence professionals had, Bill. That's just a fact. And it's not a coincidence that Edward Snowden, after he stole all that information, went off to China and now is being harbored by Vladimir Putin in Russia. So Edward Snowden is responsible for some of the techniques that terrorists now use to evade detection, as appears to have happened in Paris. The French government, which has a very effective intelligence service, apparently had very little, if any, evidence that some attack like this was going to happen.
So they learn about how it works from Snowden, our NSA, our surveillance, and go underground, go dark. Can you explain how that works a little bit to me?
Bill, anytime there's a leak of collection methods and techniques that our intelligence professionals use, the terrorists learn from that. Even if it's not in a prominent website or the New York Times or CNN, they monitor what the U.S. government does so they can have their own effective counterintelligence tools. In fact, years ago, there was an inadvertent comment made about using satellite phones to track terrorists, and Osama bin Laden immediately stopped using his satellite phone. So any leak of sources and methods is detrimental to our effort to intercept these kind of attacks before they happen.
Is this why you, Senator Kuttner, want to extend the current provisions of the Patriot Act?
Yeah, Bill, earlier this year, the Congress, in my opinion, very unwisely did away with an effective, constitutional, and fully legal telephone metadata program. The transition from that old and effective program to a new and untested, unproven system is going to occur on December 1. The federal government doesn't have a great track record with new IT systems, so I think at this time of heightened threats, at a minimum, we should push off that transition a few months until the president can certify that the new system will be at least as effective as the old system.
Makes sense to me. Let's take a look at France. A lot of questions all in and around this. Get your learned perspective. One of the things that strikes me is that, as you just said in passing, the French have pretty good surveillance. They're pretty serious about it, I guess, at least since Charlie Hebdo. But you just go to the Belgian border and things change dramatically. This town of Molenbeek apparently is a hotbed breeding ground for terrorists, and the Belgians, as policy, don't surveil their citizens.
And, Bill, when you add into that the so-called Schengen zone in the European Union that allows members to travel freely across borders with little, if any, check of passports or other papers, it raises real risks for a country like France that has a relatively effective security service because radicals from across the European Union can cross these borders and launch these kinds of attacks. And that's why I think you've seen a reassessment in France since January in the Charlie Hebdo attacks.
Yes.
And that reassessment is going to accelerate now, not only in France, but across the European Union.
You all are listening to Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton from Arkansas. Related to that, two of your colleagues, Senators Burr and Feinstein, are saying, "Hey, we're talking about Syrian refugee thing as a matter of dispute between the president and a lot of the governors, but the bigger problem is the visa waiver program. Some 20 million people, tourists, take advantage of it, and Burr and Feinstein are saying maybe we need to." Burr said, from a threat standpoint, I'm more concerned with the visa waiver program. Do we have to look at that and suspend that?
Bill, I think we should at least reassess our approach to the visa waiver program. So in a number of countries, citizens can travel to the United States without a visa and therefore without any substantial background check. Our country depends on that tourism. Many jobs depend on that kind of tourism, but at the same time, we have to keep Americans safe. So I think we should reassess the way we approach the visa waiver program, maybe consider about whether we apply it to only natural-born citizens of those countries, not naturalized citizens. Consider whether we at least look into the past travel history of citizens of those countries. You know, if you're a French citizen who has repeated visas going into Middle Eastern countries, then perhaps we want to give you a little more scrutiny. If you've never traveled anywhere outside of Western Europe, then perhaps you need less scrutiny. So I think we at least have to reevaluate the way we approach the visa waiver program. It would be precipitous to say that we should simply shut it down entirely, though.
What we know about these people in France was that a number of them were French citizens. I don't know whether they were born in France or naturalized in France, but we know they were French citizens, right?
Yes, at least some of them were French citizens, and it is believed that some or all traveled to Syria. Of course, some of the attackers blew themselves up, so we have very little information, and it may be hard to find information on them, but it does seem that at least some of them traveled to Syria.
All right, let's go to war, or let's talk about war, because you know it like very few people do. You've been in it. You've waged it on behalf of the United States. Syrian refugee thing, visa waiver program. Don't we want to get to this thing at its source? I think we do. I think you've said so. You've led us in Syria and Iraq, and we're not doing this in a serious way, correct?
Yeah, that's right, Bill. I mean, the war on terror is not like college football. You want to play away games. You don't want to play home games.
Good.
And right now we're inviting the Islamic State to play home games, not only in Western Europe, but in the United States. And they've said that they want to attack us. Their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, when he was released from detention in Iraq in the middle part of the last decade, reportedly told American soldiers, "I'll see you guys in New York." Their intention is clear. Their capabilities are increasingly clear, having now brought down a Russian aircraft, having killed dozens in Lebanon, and now having killed over 100 in Paris. And as they increasingly use encrypted communications, we can't be sure if we're missing plots to attack us here in the United States. So here's the question we should ask ourselves, Bill. What would we do if a Paris-style attack happened in Little Rock or Washington or New York? And that's what we should do right now.
Okay. I see, right. Act as if it's already happened and take those precautions. But what about in those countries? We just had General McInerney on, and we had Bing West on yesterday. I want to ask you about something Bing said of a historic nature. But McInerney, because we had a news report from the New York Times that big bombing raids over Raqqa, but it hit mostly empty warehouses because of our fastidiousness about no collateral damage. General McInerney was explaining to us under international law, collateral damage is acceptable if this is the only way to get at the enemy, at least some degree of it. Is that right? Is that true? And should we be doing a better job? If we don't want to do it, would the Brits do it? Would the French do it, since they're mad?
Well, that is right as a matter of the law of armed conflict, Bill. The American military, like the Israeli military, is extraordinarily careful when it comes to civilian casualties, as we should be. I don't want to see civilian casualties in Syria and Iraq, but I even more don't want to see civilian casualties in the United States or in our Western European
And that's
allies.
the balancing, right? That's the balancing. And you don't have the option of no casualties.
When your enemy is intentionally putting his command and control facilities and his arms depot and his training centers in civilian populations, in the same way that Hamas in the Gaza Strip intentionally launches mortars and rockets against Israel from hospitals and schools, we don't have much of a choice. We have to strike our enemies before they strike us. And the actions over the last 72 hours are self-evidently refuting President Obama's claims that his strategy are working, Bill.
Sure.
France has now bombed several sites in Raqqa. We just bombed a couple of days ago over 100 trucks that were driving oil that was bringing in $50 to $80 million a month in revenue for the Islamic State. It's not like we just discovered those trucks and those facilities over the weekend.
Okay.
It has been the direct policy of the president not to make those strikes because he is excessively fastidious about the prospect of any kind of casualties in Syria, which has caused casualties in Paris.
Yeah, but this is the same president who drew the red line, didn't do anything, and what did we see, Tom Cotton? 300,000 killed in Syria with barrel bombs and other things?
Well, and that was in 2013, Bill. I supported the president's claim or desire to get congressional support for those airstrikes. But the failure of policy really goes back to 2011 when Bashar al-Assad first turned his guns against peaceful protesters and Barack Obama's just his choice to let Syria burn. And now the flames are washing up on the shores of Europe, and they could be reaching the United States. And for the president to attack his own opponents as cynical when it's the direct result of his policy to let Syria burn for the last 4 years is as cynical as anything I've seen in recent American politics.
We're talking to Senator Tom Cotton. We had Bing West on yesterday. He recalled 2004. He was there in Fallujah. They were moving in, the Marines were moving in, I guess Army too, and they, in sight was Zarqawi, and Baghdadi was also there when they got the order to turn around and leave. He said if we had been able to finish that job then, we might have been able to avoid some of this. Do you agree?
Well, it's always possible. And as the old saying goes from Napoleon, if you're going to take Vienna, you have to take Vienna.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a disagreement between you and him. I just want you to recall, because you had your own experience.
But
we had opportunities there that might have helped us. Well, there's a lot of things we could have done.
Well, I think it's also instructive, Bill, that the man who leads the Islamic State right now was once in American custody in Iraq.
Okay.
And it should be a lesson for us right now as we're continuing to let terrorists out of Guantanamo Bay, as we just did over the weekend. President Obama released more terrorists from Guantanamo Bay back to the Middle East.
Right.
And that should be a lesson for all of us. More generally, too, we have to do to the Islamic State what we did to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Iraq after the surge. One, we have to eliminate their leaders, which requires greater intelligence and more willingness to engage targets where we find them. And two, to deny them the safe haven that they have. They have a kind of safe haven now that Al-Qaeda itself never even had in Afghanistan.
Two quick questions. It seems to me, talking to you and several other people over the last few days, conceptually and militarily, this is not beyond the pale. I mean, this is not that difficult to figure out what to do and to do it. Is that correct?
This is not a military challenge, Bill. This is a political challenge. We need a president who will put his political will behind defeating the Islamic State.
And excuse the academic expression here. I read an article. I read an article in Atlantic as well, that because these guys are committed to the caliphate, they could be drawn out to a kind of OK Corral. You say, we're going to meet you on the plane outside of Raqqa. They need to go because that's who they are. They cannot turn down that invitation. Is there anything to that?
If they want that kind of ultimate showdown on the plains of Dabiq, then we should consider giving it to them, Bill.
Got it. Senator Cotton, thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure and always enlightening. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
And was that